Happy New Year! As we launch this podcast's 2025 season, we look back at a website with a legacy that predates Lorehaven. Way back in 2006, several Christian fantasy creators started a team blog called Speculative Faith. Let's look back on that project that led to thousands of great articles from dozens of creators and then later grew into this Lorehaven mission and this podcast.
Speculative fiction, like no other genre, reflects the creativity of God.
If you look at the scriptures, you're going to have to see that God uses imagination more than rational discourse.
We are supposed to be image bearers for a vastly creative God.
Reading fantastical fiction opened a portal in my imagination for a place other than just a materialistic world.
I experienced the gospel story with the mind of someone who loved adventure and loved the idea of light conquering darkness.
We're wired for stories that reflect how we see the world in ways that are true.
The story is either pointing to Christ or it's pointing to our need for Christ.
Merry post-Christmas from your Lorehaven creative team. This is Fantastical Truth, our podcast from Lorehaven, where we explore fantastical stories for God's glory. I am Steamer Burnett, the publisher of Lorehaven, and author this year of a science fiction novel that launches 2 months from now in March called Above the Circle of Earth.
And I'm Zackary Russell, sitting here thinking, man, what a year it's been. And it's only January 4th as we record this, so I am looking forward to going back in time a little bit. And this is episode 244. How did speculative faith lead to the Lorehaven mission?
And in fact, spoiler alert, Speculative Faith also led to Zach's and my friendship, to which point I can ask, Zach, what'd you get for Christmas? And give, but especially get. How did God's grace upon grace lavish upon thee this holiday season?
Yeah, I got a set of really nice chore jackets, as they're called, which I didn't even know that term till a few months ago. So looking forward to wearing those. Got a couple new books. Let's see, I got a bunch of good things in my stocking, like a lot of protein bars, Reese's peanut butter cups, and of course the obligatory toothbrush.
I got two books for Christmas. One was a fun book, and then the other one was a very serious book by Andrew T. Walker. The one about natural law. Faithful Reason. I'm looking forward to cracking that one open. It's not a very fiction book, but it is a book that I think helps us support a biblical worldview case for fiction. Whether or not he makes it, I'm going to make it if the book supports it. So that book could actually help with this podcast. And I got some fun book. I got some socks, but they're fun socks. There's Christmas socks, One Piece, anime-related socks, that kind of thing. What else? Bible cover. My wife and I did the Gifts of the Magi thing and got one another Bible covers, although we didn't have to sell prized possessions to do it. Fortunately, she got this really nice green one that matches her Bible, which is the Illuminated Bible, I think. And I got this amazing brown leather case that replaces this much thinner and well-worn black case that I've had probably since I was a teenager. And it's definitely threadbare now, but this one is much more awesome. Definitely is a great fit for the Reformation Study Bible.
Mm-hmm. I wish I could say the signature gift that I gave this year was as spiritual as that, but I continued a family tradition now for the 6th year of collecting animal memes all year long and printing them in a little photo book at Walgreens. And so we're up to volume 6 of funny animals and just all kinds of just little, jokes I found on social media all year long. And I stash them away in a folder. And then I print them out, and then everyone enjoys a good laugh. Everyone needs a good meme, especially in the new year.
That is so wholesome, Zach. Once again, you bless me there just now, and I'm sure you bless listeners as well. Another great way we're trying to bless listeners here is with all of the work I got done over the holiday break, and that is with the upgrades at Lorehaven. If you go to lorehaven.com, you will notice some upgrades at the top there. Desktop version looks especially shiny. There's a new and improved menu landscape there. I'm always tinkering with those, but the highlight there is the upgraded Lorehaven book search page. Book search has now become almost too powerful. The idea there is that you shouldn't have to browse a bunch of pages to find the books that you want or your kids want. You should just be able to put in a keyword maybe a drop-down list of authors, drop-down, or rather a checkbox for age groups, and then click the button and voila. Lorehaven.com will fetch up to 1,500 library listings and over 330 reviews and present you with the ones that are most likely to be best for you and your family. That's totally free at Lorehaven.com, along with this podcast and articles, news, everything else. Subscribe free, get updates. You can also join the Lorehaven Guild, our Castle in the Cloud on Discord, which is hopping this month, by the way. Even more so, hopefully it's not because we're taking a break from those monthly book quests, but folks must have a lot of rest time over the holidays, so we're chatting up in there. I was even talking with some fellas about the technical upgrades to Lorehaven. Hopefully we'll have those book quests come back in a month or so. We're going to look at book quests again and reviews, and maybe end up, spoiler alert here, maybe end up hybridizing them. In the meantime, I've also been adding to Lorehaven search all of those speculative faith articles that we're going to talk about today. So this is something I've had in the works for a while. I've been running that site alongside Lorehaven for a bit, but they were always kind of partitioned. Well, the partition's taken down, although it's still very clearly at the site, very clear at the site, what's a speculative faith article and what's a Lorehaven article. But you should be able to find everything effectively under one roof, and everything shows up under the same authors and the search and everything. My little web host heart is very happy about that. But that's one reason we're talking about that now, Zach, is a speculative faith, although I'm jumping the gun a little bit, will be 20 years old as of 2026. And for this episode of the podcast, we're starting a new on again, off again series called Lorehaven 7 Years, because Lorehaven started in January of 2018 with our print issue warming up for spring release. And it's exciting to look back over 7 years of this work, and this podcast too, 5 years, started 5 years ago or was it 4? How does that work exactly? It started anyway in January of 2020. It's got to be 5 years because we do almost 50 episodes a year and we're almost at 250 episodes. So 5 years, that's how that works. And I think it'd be great to just go back over some of that story and maybe share with listeners, who started this whole Lorehaven thing, what's in it for them. Understanding our past helps fulfill our future. Top sponsor going back into this year will be Enclave Publishing and their friends at Oasis Family Media. Enclave's last novel was Memoria by J.J. Fisher, previous podcast guest last spring. She's now finishing her Nightingale trilogy with Memoria, released back in December. Would you save a life if you knew it would destroy another? In the deeply divided world of Caldera, nothing is as it seems. Taken captive by a faceless enemy, Stephanie Winter fights to reclaim her soul as her gift spirals out of control and the deadly poison coursing through her veins begins to exact its terrible vengeance. Dorian and Cass are forced into an uneasy alliance in order to find the woman they both love, a woman who has all but vanished from the face of the earth, along with the reliquary. Finding her becomes impossible as the identity of their greatest adversary continues to elude them. When Caldera's past catches up with the trio's future, Stephanie, Dorian, and Cass are forced to make decisions that threaten everything and everyone they care about. Each of them is offered a chance to sacrifice their own happiness for the sake of the other, but will they take it? And what will it cost them in the end? Enclave Publishing presents Memoria, Book 3 in the Nightingale trilogy by J.J. Fisher, already released and available wherever fantastic books are sold. Ask for Memoria at your favorite bookseller or order it online at Amazon or from enclavepublishingstore.com, which is also my publisher, and books there, the hardcovers, are always 20% off. It's also available in audio from Oasis Audio. You can see that cool cover and all the links for all the sponsors in our show notes for this episode 244, or go to lorehaven.com/podcast. Chapter 1, Zach. We're going to roll back the clock. 19 years ago, not 19 years later, 2006, the creation of speculative faith. I was almost there, Gandalf. I was almost there when 5 Christian creators came together and decided to launch a blog to call for more Christian fantasy from publishers. That was in 2006 with 5 Christian creators, most of whom I know. I don't know if I've ever met Carol Collette, but she was one of those. I have all these links in the show notes too. And then there's a chap who started off and wrote quite a few articles, Brian Davis, whom I have met several times, a frequent attender, exhibitor at homeschool conferences, and primarily known for fantasy novels about dragons, but he's done many other genres too, some science fiction, some supernatural, even some scary stories. He started off with Speculative Faith under the name Cleft Spear, which Dragons in Our Midst fans will recognize as the name of the dragon from that series. I think he actually got started here before he was published. So at the time, that was a character from his manuscript and not yet known to thousands and thousands of readers. Then there was Rebecca Llewellyn Miller, a good friend of mine. She stayed with the site the entire time. She was there from the beginning, and she was there until things kind of dropped off in 2021. So many articles I've been going through just to make sure everything made it over to the site safely. Still working on it, making sure all the pictures line up just so. But you will find hundreds and hundreds of articles from this faithful Christian voice. Then there was Mirtica Schultz. She actually wrote the very first post at Speculative Faith, just called What is Speculative Faith? I think she's still a Facebook friend of mine. I see her in my comment section every once in a while. Then there was Stuart Stockton. He actually hosted the site. He wrote a lot of articles there at the beginning, and he later wrote a Dinosaur Soldiers in Space science fiction story called Starfire.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah,
Wow.
it is. I actually have a copy. It said book 1. He never did a book 2, doggone it. But that was one of the OGs from Marcher Lord Press, which became a little publisher called Enclave Publishing. So it's all connected. All these little plot lines are interwoven there. Trivia for Friday night games. Starfire was pretty cool. And yet, I've been in touch with him recently too. I think he ended up, he actually got married to a woman he met at the American Christian Fiction Writers Conference. Became a dad, had kids, ended up moving. I stay in touch with him every once in a while. Always be grateful to him for hosting that site, even though it eventually moved to another host, which we'll get to in chapter 2. So what do I have to do with this? I met some of these folks at the American Christian Fiction Writers Conference in September of 2006. And I forget whether I volunteered myself or was invited. I frankly do not remember. But my very first post was in October that year. And I decided to kick it off with a series called 9 Marks of Widescreen Stories. There, see, I'm the guy with the Reformation Study Bible, and I'm ripping off 9 Marks Ministries and applying it to fiction. So, that's pretty on brand, actually, there about 20 years ago. Hopefully I've gotten a little less cringe about it now. I would love to go back over that series, by the way, and see, do I agree with me? Now, that may make a fun episode in the future. Maybe, Zach, we'll do that October of 2026. Just kind of look back over that and then deconstruct myself. Well, I was pretty strident there, or I was a newbie who thought I knew what publishing was like. I'm guessing one of the little myths that I'd probably pick at myself for, which in my defense, I caught up to pretty quickly, is this idea that I still see floating around is the only reason why Christian fantasy isn't more popular is because the publishers won't support it. That was, of course, jolly nonsense. Many people, the publishers, wanted to support it. Many people did. And then many projects ended up flopping because they weren't sure how to market it or the audience hadn't matured yet. I think we might be entering, maybe not a golden age, but a bronze age for Christian-made fantastical fiction. There's certainly plenty of TV shows that flirt with the fantastical genres. And I think that full-length, thoughtful novels are already here. Most of them are YA, most of them are fantasy, but I'm guessing we'll see some genre diversity coming up. And it won't be because publishers got their act together. It will be because readers connected, like the folks who founded Speculative Faith, and put their voices out there and teamed up rather than everybody being a voice crying alone in the wilderness. Why isn't there more good Christian fantasy? Then everybody teamed up and decided, oh, you know what? Instead of complaining about the culture, we could get together and make some culture. Speculative Faith was a big part of that. And without that site, you and I, Zach, would not be talking today.
All right. So I've been going through some of these articles that you linked to in the show notes, Stephen. And this debut article, What is Speculative Faith by Mirtica Schultz. She makes a comment here I want to get your opinion on because I've got some kind of tough questions for you since you've been a part of this much longer than me, about 10 years longer than me. About the middle of the article, she says, We want to mobilize a reading and writing community that will impact the future editorial acquisitional decisions of CBA publishing houses. Right now, they are not favorably inclined toward speculative fiction, unquote. Okay. So first of all, some explaining some of the jargon there. So CBA is Christian Bookseller Association. That's the main, book publishers that you think of as Christian books, Christian publishing houses.
And most of whom now own each other, by the way. There was a whole lot of mergers and such, and most of them, I think, are actually owned by general market publishers, too. They're basically imprints for those top 5.
Yeah. So she talks about wanting to impact the editorial acquisitional decision. So basically, the goal here with Spec Faith was to convince more Christian publishers to take on more fantasy and sci-fi books from Christian authors and give them basically free reign to explore those genres. So, has that happened?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I would say that as a result of websites like Speculative Faith, I wouldn't credit all of Speculative Faith, but I'd say that yes, if it had not been for folks doing things like Speculative Faith, you would not see Jeff Gerke starting Marcher Lord Press after having some editorial frustrations at publishers with which he worked. You would not see the earliest small yet growing audience for stories like Oxygen or Kathy Tyer's Firebird trilogy, acquired by Steve Lobby when he was working with Bethany House Publishers in the, I think it was early 2000s. And you would not see Marcher Lord Press turn into Enclave. You would not see a lot of smaller presses that kind of came and went. I've seen a lot of names in my time at Speculative Faith and Lorehaven. There's been some that worked, some that didn't, some that combined, some that decided, you know what, this Christian thing isn't for us. We're just going to go full general market. Lots of folks tried things, failed, took risks, truly speculative investments because of these stories that they believed in. And you'll see there, even with what Mirtica wrote there, it was interesting to see kind of a mixture of we want to build writers and readers. Well, the effect there, though, I would say there's a bit of a glitch in the approach, is that sometimes writers like to talk to each other a lot about writing. And if you're doing that, rather than talking about marketing, or even better, doing marketing, then you're probably going to circle around the same ideas a lot. And I saw a little bit of that at Speculative Faith and in some of those earlier years. But everybody, I think, kind of seemed to mature at once. They realized, hold on, we're only up here in the secret treehouse, holding the ladder up after us because no readers allowed, even though we're going to talk about the readers down there, then we're not going to grow the audience for these stories. If no audience, therefore no publisher interest. And of course, in 2006, that was really before digital publishing took off and before print on demand took off, which enabled people with smaller budgets to roll a bunch of books off the assembly line. Once that took off, the free market kind of responded to the demand, and then suddenly authors could just publish themselves. You didn't really need somebody at Tyndale House to think that you're the next big Left Behind series level thing. You could just go and take a chance on yourself and do it yourself. And you saw a lot of, not so great books out there. But then again, there was a lot of not so great books from the traditional publishers too. So Speculative Faith was really ahead of the curve and was a fantastic part of those early conversations, even with that initial platform there, 2006 to 2009, I think I would guesstimate was when it lasted.
Yeah, I mean, definitely indie publishing has really allowed a lot of authors to get visibility. I mean, we've reviewed so many indie authors on Lorehaven, which many fans would just not know about indie books because there's no bookstores for indie authors. I mean, there's hardly any bookstores physically left. It's all digital now. It's mostly on Amazon, and so we definitely are helping readers and authors connect. And Spec Faith was started in 2006 before the Kindle existed, and so much less before indie publishing. Yeah, before smartphones. So we did kind of precede. I mean, Spec Faith really did precede a lot of the advances of the last 10 years. But that didn't quite answer my question. So let me ask it this way: of the CBA publishers that Murtica is probably
Oh, you're right. I
invoking
didn't
here.
mean to dodge. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. So you Google a top 10 list of Christian publishers. So Zondervan, Bethany House, Harvest House, InterVarsity, Moody, B&H, among others. Are these publishers taking on more or less or fewer fantasy and sci-fi books now?
Probably less. Probably less. However, I do know that Tyndale has done some stuff, and I know because I talk with their people every once in a while. It's one of the advantages of being the Lorehaven publisher and chief cook and bottle washer, doing reviews and the podcast and all. I mean, lots of folks want to be on this podcast. I'm not going to tell tales out of school, but there's a marketing people will reach out, and so that they recognize, okay, the old model, I think long since recognized. It's all online now. It is not you walking into a bookstore and finding a book on the shelf that's going to catch your eye so much as your favorite podcaster talks about it. Your favorite Instagram follow talks about it. A friend tells you about it on Discord. We're in all of those places, Lorehaven, you and I. That's where we're recommending books, and we see some progress there. But as for the classic editorial structures, I think that Myrtica's hope there was fulfilled in spirit, if not literally, because I don't think Bethany House is doing a lot of fantasy. And then someone will find, like a time travel romance they published last year, and that will disprove my case. I don't think that counts. The primary genre there would be romance, with time travel as a seasoning. Now, if time travel is the main course and the romance is the seasoning, okay, you got yourself a fantastical novel. It doesn't really count. I know there's a few others that have been doing it. I think it's Marion's publisher, Marion Jacobs, our friend, is B&H, and they're publishing her nonfiction book about fictional magic, which I've thought for a while is a fantastic way in to talk about these kinds of stories in a nonfiction context that is more accessible to the readership that's accustomed to getting nonfiction books from a Christian publisher. I kind of did a version of that myself with Ted Turneau and Jaron Moore in our book, The Pop Culture Parent. That was from New Growth Press, which is a really great publisher. And they have some fantastical adjacent books. And I thought for a while, adjacent is probably the best you can hope for the top Christian publishers, or kind of the medium Christian publishers. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be on the internet. It's going to be smaller presses. It's going to be authors building their own platforms. And it's going to be sites like Speculative Faith and now Lorehaven. And it's going to be podcasts. Hopefully this one, really, I would like to think Lorehaven, Fantastical Truth is the flagship podcast of Christian fantastical genres.
And I think that's kind of the answer to this. And maybe it's not the answer we want. Looking back on this, we would want Zondervan and InterVarsity and Bethany to have a much bigger portfolio of these fantasy books. But the reality is publishing has changed so much since 2006. It's no longer that centralized in just these 10 or so publishers. It's much more decentralized with small presses. And also Enclave has gobbled up a lot of these authors that even some of these authors that were at the big publishers are now at Enclave. And probably something like half of genre fiction now is indie published from what I've read. And because of social media, because of, the iPhone, the Kindle, so much has changed technologically that we don't have to rely on a small number of big publishers to get all these books out. And so it's almost like the question doesn't really, I don't know, it's like we're in a different world now than when that question was asked. But let me go to your article, Stephen, the 9 marks of widescreen stories. I have a question for you here. So this was more of like towards the end of the article, you're talking about the next part 4, part 7 of the 7-part series or 9-part
ambitious
series.
Wasn't it?
Yeah. I've only read part 1, or at least only recently read part 1. I think I read all of these back in the day. But you say, I'll argue that hints or overt inclusions of biblical elements such as church attendance, evangelism, dealing with false Christians can also be included in widescreen or fantasy and sci-fi fiction.
Well, I was thinking about HD at that point. There was a lot more HD coming around. I think Blu-rays were coming on the shelf. So I was thinking, there's a difference between full screen and widescreen. I was thinking that epic Lord of the Rings film trilogy scale vision for stories. Yeah.
And so are we in the Blu-ray or the HD DVD world? Yeah. But and you talked about also the need for the church's representation in Christian stories, and you talk about here how this obviously isn't going to work in a totally made up world or universe where it's just just very different history. We're not on Earth in the future or something. We're in a totally different world, and so it's not going to be a one-to-one. But in stories that are in our future, even perhaps our near future, why wouldn't we include that? Do we think that the church is just going to disappear when we get into the Star Trek future? I don't think so. When we talked about that in those couple episodes ago. But I know you are writing this kind of story with Above the Circle of Earth because I've read it, but are you seeing this in other books?
Not so much futuristic stories about the church. At the level of excellence I'm thinking of, I would say, again, without throwing shade, there's several now. We're seeing several stories about dystopians that are not the classic evangelical end times scenario. I think there was even one in theaters recently from Angel Studios, and they are generally very wholesome and made for a particular kind of audience, but I don't see a whole lot of specific church activity there. Like, for example, let's ignore Circle of Earth for just a moment. I'm just going to make up on the spot. Imagine like a dystopian story set 10 years from now where the world is at war. China got out of control. Russia's absolutely furious. And all those drones did turn out to be, Iranian or whatever. And we're under full invasion and everything. Well, you could show like a family trying to survive that, or you could show a church. You could show like a small church in the middle of nowhere. Maybe they barely get attacked. They see most of the stuff on the news, but their supply lines are interrupted. Maybe there's some early sci-fi type technologies happening there just to give it that fantastical edge. That would be a kind of story I would want to read, or a kind of story I would want to see. But generally what I used to see in Christian fiction was the church got nerfed. The church turned into this sort of non-denominational blob. And I always appreciated it when a story came along, like Frank Peretti's The Visitation, that would name names, that might even have a little fun, and that would respect them all ultimately, except for the heretics. Christians got their quirks, and whether it's in a futuristic world or a sort of church analog, like a team of warriors in a fantasy universe, like that's how I'm thinking I want to see Christians. That's how I want to see, like, not allegory, but like watching the Fellowship of the Ring, all the Lord of the Rings series again over the holiday break. I see the Fellowship as a church type. You don't get a Jesus type in Gandalf. It's kind of, the duties are kind of split three ways with Gandalf and Aragorn and Frodo, but any of the heroes there remind me of Christians. And when you get a bunch of Christian-ish heroes together, well, that there's a church. And so I love seeing that thing in these kinds of stories, and I look forward to seeing more of those going forward. Hey, by the way, I have a quick answer for you about what the top publishers have done. Circling back just a little bit. In some sense, some of the top publishers have been publishing more fantasy, but basically they will find the best one from smaller publishers or smaller markets, and they'll acquire it. For example, Tyndale House Publishers acquired the initial Dragons in Our Midst series by Brian Davis. Oh, Spec Faith alum. So he made it all the way up there to Tyndale House. Really great, glorious covers. The original covers were very cool. But these covers kind of tribute the originals and look supremely iconic also. I may have to link that in the show notes just because it looks so cool. And then the Wingfeather Saga, probably the top-selling Christian-made fantastical book series now by Andrew Peterson, that started off at a smaller publisher, and then they couldn't even get book 3 out. Was it book 3? Andrew Peterson told us in his interview a couple of years ago. Yeah, they couldn't do book 3. They had to self-publish it with Rabbit Room Press. Well, and now all 4 books, and book 4. And all the spinoffs, but now all 4 books are available from Waterbook Publishing, which is an imprint of one of those big kahunas, Random House. So they didn't make a random choice there. They basically saw what the market of creatives had produced, and they acquired that, and they gave it new covers. They put an amazing budget behind it, and now there's a TV show and everything. So traditional publishing is still there, but they got to be extremely selective. You almost have to be already published and be really good before you have a chance of being acquired by the fellows.
Well, and that's a late breaking answer to your first question. What I get for Christmas? I gave my big girls the Blu-ray set, season 1 and season 2 of the Wingfeather Saga, and it's kind of a gift to myself too because I've really been wanting to watch this. And now I think the first season is free in the Angel Studios app, but you got to pay to be part of the guild or whatever for season 2. So I thought, I'll just
they
buy
have a
these.
guild now too against ours.
I want to, yeah. So I'm glad to own these. I also got a new Blu-ray player, so we can watch that a little more easily in the house. We don't just
buy physical media.
Yes, that's right. Own it. Don't just rent it.
Absolutely. Well, we need to move on to the next chapter of Speculative Faith. But speaking of dragons in our midst, sponsor 2 is returning champion Lori Christine, who created Garden of Mysteries, a dragon slayer Bible story, new middle grade biblical fiction with a fantastical twist by Lori Christine. There it is again, Zach. Creators trying a fantastic adjacent story like this. An ancient curse, an invisible dragon, a mysterious prophecy. Seth's parents have secrets they won't share with him. Why did the king kick them out of the garden and curse the land? And can the curse be broken? Finding answers to Seth's questions will prove more dangerous than he imagined. Can he discover the truth before the dragon destroys him? Frank Peretti meets The Chosen for kids in this adventure-packed middle-grade novel that will inspire readers to identify lies of the dragon and to put their trust in Jesus, the Dragon Slayer. Available for purchase now on Amazon. Also, be sure to check out the companion devotional for Garden of Mysteries, sold separately on Amazon. Learn more at dragonslayerbible.com or see the show notes for this episode 244. You can click there and also see that fantastic cover for a Dragon Slayer Bible story. Chapter 2. Let's skip ahead. Speculative Faith had a rebirth in 2010, the rebirth of Speculative Faith. So, a brief personal update. I got married in 2009 and fell off Speculative Faith. And I wasn't the only one. Other folks may not have gotten married, but somehow this just kind of happened with a lot of blogs, even really good team blogs like this one in the late 2010s or late 2000s, rather. The site, which I don't even remember the type of blogging platform there. Blog, by the way, is just basically an article, but we gave it a fun name, which meant, Zach, what is that? It was like weblog. That was it. Yeah. Weblog. So yeah, unlike a page that just you have to go into code to change it, a weblog had a dynamic programming behind it, different pages that would update drawn from a database. So you could just publish your diary, publish articles. Yeah, it really took off then in 2005. Anyway, 2010, a year after I got married, I guess I had a lot of spare time. I still wanted to do this Christian fantastical thing, and I missed the weekly commitment to Speculative Faith. So I went to work salvaging the site. I got in touch with Stuart. I think we worked out a way to port over the material as best I could, which is no easy feat. And I put it all on a WordPress page, got its domain name, speculativefaith.com. And then went through and deleted a whole lot of spam comments. I just remember a whole lot of gold watches being advertised for at Speculative Faith. Well, we had something much more valuable, the power of story, which can outlast even gold. Anyway, got a new life there, thanks to Rebecca Llewellyn Miller as well, who rejoined that team from the original lineup. I think by then others had moved on. I mean, Brian Davis was busy writing a new Dragons book every month. Becky and I anchored the site, and we rounded up some other folks to do weekly or twice monthly commitments. Basically, everybody picked a day, and we didn't even really have an editorial structure or a background chat, really, or anything like that. We just, okay, this is your day. You write about what you like. It's just got to be something Christian and something speculative. We had a lot of guest writers, too. Like, I really wanted to go out and get guest writers, and a lot of them, listener, you may recognize their names, depending on how long you've been in this community. Jill Williamson wrote several articles at the original site from March to May 2009. That was before she got published with a little thing called By Darkness Hid, her medieval fantasy novel. More on Jill later on the show. Andrew Peterson, he was a songwriter, but he wasn't yet a well-known fantasy author. He wrote in July 2011 an article I think we alluded to in our interview with Andrew Peterson, "Please stop writing fantasy novels." What a great headline there. And it's basically about, I'm such a critic of fantasy. I don't like most of it. So why am I making it? Well, they say not to do that in writer school, but he's Andrew Peterson. So I guess he does what he wants. Great article. Chuck Black was there once. Man, I don't really want to have him back. He's also at a lot of the Christian homeschool conferences. He wrote an article in November 2012 called "The Power of Christian Fiction." And then, Zach, I don't even remember. I wish I remembered how we got connected with an author named Rebecca P. Miner. But she wrote an articles, she's written a few articles for Speculative Faith starting in July 2012, which was 1 year before she and her husband Scott put together this event called Realm Makers in St. Louis in August of 2013. And wow, did that get big? Tongues twisted just thinking about it. Another instance of people going beyond the blogs, which is an article I wrote at Speculative Faith. Hey guys, it's time to go beyond the blogs. It's time to get together. Rebecca P. Miner's putting this together. Let's go check it out. And that, I think, more than anything else, has done amazing things for putting these creatives together. Realm Makers. I don't think Speculative Faith helped create Realm Makers, but we certainly got in on the ground floor and rallied support for this effort. Morgan L. Bussey has written many fantasy novels now, most recently Winter's Maiden with Enclave. That's her publisher. She wrote several articles starting in 2012. And then Nadine Brandis, also a previous podcast guest and an Enclave perennial. She wrote an article in December 2014 called "Should We Be Reading Books to Escape Reality?" I'm going to go out on a limb and say no. Tolkien says the books, the good ones, just send you back into reality and etc. and escapism and prisons and jailers and all the stuff that we know about. Those are just 6 of those voices that I saw. Maybe you, listener, remember reading a really great article at Speculative Faith by a favorite author of yours. I'd love to hear about that. Email us, podcast@lorehaven.com, or tag us on the socials. But Zach, you found Speculative Faith. That's how you're here. What do you remember about the site coming in from the outside?
Well, it was maybe around 2014 when I kind of started getting the bug in me to want to write a science fiction story from a Christian perspective. And I started Googling questions along these lines. So the very first thing I ran across was actually an article from Mike Duran that was on the Gizmodo subdomain IO9 from like 2010 or 2011, but I found it in 2014, I think. And it was an article something like, "Christian readers want more fantasy and sci-fi. Why aren't publishers listening?" So this was several years
that one
after and this is just a secular blog, part of the Gawker network. And there were a lot of really interesting comments on this. And one of those comments led me to Spec Faith. And then at one point, I think I searched in there, or I just did a Google search for, essentially, will Jesus return before humans go to Mars? And like, is anyone thinking about this question? Because it seemed like we're headed for a future where humans will actually go to Mars because of things like SpaceX and maybe NASA. And so
if they're
I
good,
thought, yeah. And, this was several years after I'd read the Left Behind series, which basically Jesus came back before humans went off world. Other than low Earth orbit. And I thought, maybe he's not going to come back that soon. Maybe it'll be much later. And I wonder if anyone's writing stories that involve that. And, and I was mostly thinking of like end times type stories, like, will Jesus gather his elect from the 4 winds, including the winds of Mars, or the winds of Neptune or something. But that's where I found an article you had written along these lines. And I just was like, man, I found my people. I found the Christians that ask these kind of weird questions. And, I love all these articles that you brought up. I love the Andrew Peterson article because, he talks about just growing up as the one fantasy nerd among his group of musician friends, and they all make fun of him for it. But he's like, hey, I like poetry, and I like, gardening books, and I like just, plain classic literature. And his point with this article is, look, fantasy needs to kind of up its game a little bit. Christian fantasy, like we have such a long tradition of great literature let's not just like shove all that away and say, oh, there's no great Christian books out there. Like there's a ton. And, and we invented this genre. And if you really think about it, so I really appreciate his encouragement to kind of elevate the prose and the actual storytelling of these books. And I really do like Rebecca Miner's article, which I just read before the show, about how the image of a sword is in the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. And what a sword represents as opposed to a ranged weapon. It means that you are up close and personal with the enemy you are trying to defeat. And there's basically no way there could be collateral damage. This isn't a cluster bomb. This isn't even a handgun. This is a close combat weapon, which means you yourself are also, probably going to get stabbed. Stephen, this week, I'll try to keep this family friendly. And I haven't even watched this. I've just been reading about this, but there was some video that went viral from the Ukraine-Russia war of these two men in a knife fight. And, and it's supposedly very, brutal. And the main comment or commentary I read on this is, if you're going to get in a knife fight, just prepare to be stabbed. Whoever gets stabbed the least wins. And I thought, oh yeah, that's why you don't ever want to get in a knife fight, or that's why there's the phrase, don't bring a knife to a gunfight, or bring a gun to a knife fight, rather, to say it more positively. And in most fantasy novels, everyone's got swords. I mean, it's just a slight extension of your fist, but it represents kind of the nobility, the commitment to stand in between the innocent and the evildoer, and how Christ's word is described as a sword. In the end, the angels that capture the devil are using swords and chains, like, again, just very melee weapons, essentially. A lot of really good thoughts she wrote about the how the choice of weaponry in fantasy makes the lines between good and evil very clear. And I think that's why fantasy really appeals to a lot of Christian readers, because it's not this sort of gray deconstructionist postmodern morality that is so prevalent in the very unnamed popular fantasy series. That's kind of an aberration. A lot of fantasy is not like that really big one that everyone knows about. A lot of it is very clear, black and white, good versus evil.
Thinking out loud here, I kind of want to republish these articles. A lot of them were in fantastic shape originally. They would just need a little bit of cleanup. Then I just copy them over, maybe do a light editing pass, and then voila, we have ourselves a Lorehaven article with credit to the original and with the original date on there. Not making a promise here, faithful listeners, but that is something that I think I want to do for those guest articles, and also many other regular writers for Speculative Faith who had those weekly slots. The only reason why I don't mention them here is because there were so many. Some rotated on or off within a year or two, and then others dug in for the long haul. Special shout out, though, should go to Shannon McDermott. She had the Wednesday slot. I remember, I think maybe, was it every Wednesday or alternating Wednesdays? I forget. Shannon, if you're listening, let me know. Shannon came on board with Lorehaven when we started with the reviews back in 2018. And she has been writing reviews ever since, hoping to get more of those from her, even in this coming new year. She's been a little busy because she also likes to hang out on Mars and ask those questions. And we have ourselves a little Mars club. She wrote a novel published by Enclave last fall called The Time Door, which has an astronaut on Mars on the cover, which just makes my heart happy too, my sci-fi heart, because we're seeing, like I said, that diversity in genres. And the publishers generally are pretty smart. They know what they're doing. They wouldn't publish something like that if they thought there wasn't an audience for it. And articles like these, Zach, like you mentioned, Becky's article, Rebecca P. Miner's article about the swords and the kind of the worldview behind it, like that sort of approach is just classic spec faith. And rolling that philosophy into Lorehaven, just adding a little more structure to the publishing process, really is the only thing that Lorehaven did. It's a more developed version of the speculative faith idea. It is certainly fair to say, and it inherits that legacy, which I'll talk about in chapter 3.
I also really like Nadine Brandis's book or article. Should we be reading books to escape reality? 10 years ago, we've probably talked about this a couple of times on the podcast. Maybe not as a full episode, but we've talked about this theme a lot. And she says here in the middle, if books really are portals, then they should leave you somewhere you weren't when you finish them, somewhere enlightened. And there was a little follow up to that and a lot of good comments kind of exploring that a bit more, which is the other thing I really like about this site. Oh, wow. There's
Oh,
actually
good.
quite
The
a few
comments are
here.
showing up. As a 2014
Yeah.
article. I had a little trouble getting the comments over. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. What I really like about this is that this is an article that's basically discipling the reader, not just the writer. And I really like when we have that focus on even the Spec Faith articles. That's primarily our focus for Lorehaven articles. But we should all be readers, first of all, even if we're writers. But we're always reading stuff, right? And even if it's not books, we're reading social media stuff all the time. And so, why are we reading all these things? Like, what is the point of all of it? Is it just to escape and just to kind of turn off our emotions for a while and just like I joked at the beginning, like, wow, what a year it's been, and it's only like January 4th. It can be very easy to want to just get away from our troubles. And I like this call that Nadine has is go into a book to become different, to kind of put it that way, go into a book to be changed for the better. And I even like a comment she left down below where she's like, I even, there was a really bad book I read that it was so bad I couldn't finish it. And I'm paraphrasing. And it taught me the lesson that you don't have to finish every book. And that kind of freed me from that mindset of I cannot finish a book and that's fine. I can just start a new one. And so even that book changed her in a positive way. And yes, to you, our listener, it is okay. If you do not finish a book, just pick up another one. Literally, no one will care.
But it is incumbent on you to finish every podcast episode because otherwise you won't get to hear the third sponsor for the episode, which in this case, speaking of Jill Williamson, is her new book coming out, by the way, set in the Blood of Kings universe called Squire of Truth. In fact, it is out next Tuesday from this publisher. Cole has journeyed far from his days as a stray stable boy in a distant mountain village. Haunted by failures on the battlefield, he seeks solace in music. But when the songstress he spent a fleeting evening with shows up at his doorstep, Cole may have gotten more than he asked for. Amidst the turmoil of a looming royal wedding and the threat of dark magic, Cole and Mistel must unravel the mystery of a brutal murder before they become the next targets in a deadly game of power. Return to the world of Eretz in Squire of Truth, a murder mystery romantasy from award-winning author Jill Williamson, and the first installment in the epic Blood of Kings Legends series. You can find that cool cover linked in our show notes for this episode 244, and we'll have that in our Lorehaven book search at the website. And by the way, we're having Jill Williamson making her Fantastical Truth debut next week. Spoiler alert. I've been looking forward to talking with her on the podcast for a long time because Zach, she was part of this story too, as I mentioned. She had a Speculative Faith article or two. I met her at some of those American Christian Fiction Writers Conferences. Really great woman and prolific too. It's very cool to see her going back to that the Blood of Kings series there. I think she's done a few spinoffs. But this one should be fascinating to watch. As is the legacy of Speculative Faith, which takes us to the present, 2025. Yes, that's the year that we're writing on our checks now. So just a quick sum up, because some of these behind-the-scenes details may not be as interesting to folks. Spec Faith led me as a official creative at Speculative Faith to experiment with more of an editorial structure. We had some reviews that we ran of Christian fantasy books. I put in a classification for reviews. The library actually got started on Speculative Faith before it officially got ported over to Lorehaven, because I was the only one who was doing it. Although I think there was I think Stuart uploaded a bunch of stuff to the library too back in the day, but that was a little while ago. We also had more polished articles by guest writers. That was how I actually met Ted Turneau and Jaron Moore. And then we eventually teamed up and wrote a book called The Pop Culture Parent. And then it was in 2017, I think, that I was approached with the idea of making a print magazine, kind of inspired by what Speculative Faith was doing. But we gave it a new name, and that was Lorehaven, and started as a print magazine quarterly. But then we really shifted in 2020 because of lockdowns, putting a damper on events. And the whole idea was, well, we were going to go to events and sell these magazines and raise support and all of this. But eventually, Lorehaven really turned into, like I said, the developed version of Speculative Faith. All the reviews were there, more articles were there, but we have much more structure to it. It's behaving much more like a publisher, not for profit. We're still in it for the mission. But then, Zach, you came along with this podcast idea, and we started that in 2020. And thank the Lord that we did phase out the print publication, because I can't imagine trying to do the print publication and the website and the podcast, and now also trying to promote a science fiction novel all at the same time. Lorehaven eventually really combined the strengths of that volunteer approach, but also the strengths of editorial structure. At that point, I'm functioning as official publisher and editor-in-chief. I had a guy for a bit being the review chief, did a great job. And then a lot of guest voices there in that magazine. And that's how we started with Marian Jacobs. She'd written some Speculative Faith stuff, and she was a great voice for a regular column in the print magazine alongside Peter Franson, with whom I'm still in touch over at Christian Geek Central. Shout out to you guys. But today, all of that Speculative Faith content, I think I saw 2,500 individual articles, lives on. It's a subsection of Lorehaven now. The partition is down. It's all under one roof, but you can just go to lorehaven.com/speculative faith, and there's everything there. There's probably still a few missing images here and there, mostly because back when they started the original blog, there wasn't a whole lot of emphasis on images, but WordPress wants a featured image for social media, and it just looks nicer. So you'll see some blank areas. You'll see some dead links. It may take a while for us to work through those. But as of New Year's Eve, you can just search. If you want to see everything ever written about dragons on there, just go to the search box, type dragons, boom, dragons. Top results, books about dragons, reviews about dragons. Next results, articles, Spec Faith articles, podcasts all about dragons. You will learn all you needed to know from a Christian worldview about dragons. Or swords, if Rebecca P. Miner didn't cover it in her article, or spaceships, or any of those things. Natural law is probably in there. End times is in there. What is the total now? I mean, it's probably over 4,000 articles now, just articles about those kinds of topics, going back to that Speculative Faith legacy. And many, many more reviews, by the way, including feature-length reviews of Christian published fantasy that aren't Lorehaven reviews, but should be. So we're probably going to copy those over, polish them up a little bit going into this year too. It's exciting. I now have some editorial help thanks to Josiah DeGraff. So we're going to have some great stuff at Lorehaven, but again, it would not be there if it wasn't for all of the amazing work, people taking a chance on a speculative investment at the original Speculative Faith blog starting in 2006.
Yeah, Stephen, I did just try to search for dragons, and it kind of broke my internet browser here. There's like 4 pages of results and quite a few books with dragons in the title or on the cover, or I guess in the description, because maybe it doesn't have a title that says dragon something. But wow, yeah, this is really cool. I like how everything is sorted here. I'm just kind of doing this live. It might, it might be neat to kind of see this break out a little bit between articles and podcast episodes, but it's
we'll have a filter eventually.
Now. Yeah.
We'll eventually have a filter on there.
Yeah.
You'll be able to check a box and say, okay, just show me the articles, and you hit a button and boom, just articles, or then just show me the podcast or reviews, boom, same.
And then you can kind of filter through, dragon books for teens or young boys or adults. And I really like that. I think that's a really good service to our readers. That is why we are doing all this to our listener. We want to make it easy for you to find good books for yourself, for your family members, or your friends. And we really believe in, what all these authors are doing. And I just really like, by the way, I just want to go back to something Chuck Black's article about the power of Christian fiction. And,
I need to republish that. I still want to have Chuck on the podcast. New Year's resolution.
Yeah. I really just like how he said that as an author, he wanted to really question himself, like, why is it that I want to read and write these books? Is there any biblical, foundation for this? And he talks there about the story that the prophet Nathan tells to King David about the rich man and the ewe lamb. We've talked about that before on this podcast many times. And just the power of story to convict the heart of even a king. And but also the other side of that is that an author, a book, is basically in the role of a teacher, and there is stricter judgment for that. And I like all the ways that Chuck explored that to say, I want to handle this very carefully, just like you would handle a sword very carefully. And, just the real thoughtfulness that all of these authors and article writers have put into all of their content, that is really what we take seriously here at Lorehaven. We aren't just slapping the Christian label on anything. Like we are trying to find, the best books and articles and so forth that will help people move towards Christ and not just, just kind of put Christ on whatever we're already doing and enjoying, which is also what Andrew Peterson talked about. Like he grew up with the Dragonlance books, and he's like, yeah, I'm going to kind of put those aside, but I'm going to try to write something better. And I'm going to try to enjoy better things that are a little more poetic and so forth, but also more wholesome and more Christ honoring.
Zach, I did something unusual in the past couple of weeks. I went to a Christian bookstore. Yes, they do exist, at least in Central Texas. And it was a fairly large one, too. It's, Christian and educational supplies. It's a gift shop at the same time. Called Mardell, by the way. Really nice place.
Great place.
Lots of great Bibles, lots of great conversations going around me, and genuine Christmas spirit. I was there just a few days before Christmas, and it was an altogether positive experience. And they're not even a sponsor. But I saw it was actually in the Bible section, the display for the Wingfeather Saga by Andrew Peterson. So that's the advantage of a larger publisher. Once you've got a proven audience like that, you can get a display like that. But it did my heart good to see all those books and the Blu-ray discs, and to know that even beyond a super headliner like Andrew Peterson, he probably wouldn't say he's the chosen one who's going to save Christian fantasy, but God has gifted him with that position and with those talents, not just fantasy creation, but music. And obviously he's close to some good business folk as well there. So we see it happening a few times. Brian Davis as well to some extent, and several other authors. And I have no doubt that in the coming new year, as people are getting annoyed with agenda fiction or deconstructive fiction, like I've seen a few people say, hey, guys, like a lot of people looking into Christianity now, a lot of people buying Bibles, a lot of young men going back to church. These guys are going to need Christian-made stories, sincere ones, not cheesy ones, not, well, they did their best type stories. Like stories that, no, they actually did do their best and it was really good. And they take the craft seriously and they're putting money into it and they are training hard and not being afraid to say no. That's the kind of stuff I want to see those acquisitions people doing, but more so I want readers to expect these kinds of things. That's why we do the reviews at Lorehaven. We only do the positive reviews. We don't do negative reviews. We just kind of ignore stuff that our review team didn't like. We're retooling reviews now, but we'll get back to those. The whole point is to raise up a generation of readers. It's not about just teaching the publishers a lesson. It's about terraforming Christians to enjoy great stories, whether or not they're fantastical, for God's glory.
Well, to you, our listener, do you remember reading any articles from Speculative Faith from when it started in 2006 or the late aughts or the early 2010s? If so, what was the article? What were the themes you remember? Please link to that article if you can find it, search for it, or just quote something from it. Send us a note to podcast@lorehaven.com, or you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and tag us there. We'd love to read one of your comments on the show. We love getting messages from listeners, so please send us that message and please share this episode with a friend.
Next on Fantastical Truth, what if the future king's squire and a struggling songstress teamed up to solve a medieval murder? Jill Williamson debuted her first fantasy, By Darkness Hid, in April 2009. Since then, she has written many dozens of books across fantasy, sci-fi, and teen spy genres. Now she has returned to the Blood of Kings world for Squire of Truth, releasing next week. And on that same day, she will join this podcast. Welcome to the new year. We are going to celebrate 7 years of Lorehaven, many more years of that speculative faith legacy. And we are also celebrating Jesus in every genre over the next few months. First quarter, this podcast will largely be explorations of genres with particular emphasis on the fantasy before we count down our launch of Martian Month in March to celebrate Above the Circle of Earth and other Mars adjacent stories. We look forward to celebrating all of these genres with you. And again, just keep in mind, it is for God's glory, not just our good, but we get the gifts that he's given us through these amazing stories as we continue to seek and find his fantastical truth.